Good morning and welcome to Viewpoint, your program of personalities, politicians, and perspectives. Good morning to you again. Pull your shorts up a little tighter today. If you go outside, you'll find that the breeze is going to get to you. We're not going to fool around this morning. Judy, we're going to have a real interesting guest. Mrs. Busby is going to bring you more very shortly. Instead of kudos, which we try to do each Wednesday morning, this morning I'm going to take a personal minute and get well wishes to one of our well-wishers and our viewers way up in La Crosse, Wisconsin.
Oh, yes.
Mrs. Harvey slipped and fell in her garage and bunked herself up a little bit. So we want to send healing messages to Lois Harvey up there in La Crosse, Wisconsin, in lieu of our kudos this morning.
Yes, I was very sorry to hear about that. Bless her heart.
Yeah, she is, and she critiques us and tells us when we do well and when we don't do so well.
She's an honest
good for
woman.
her. All right, let's get down to some serious business. This fellow's giving up his time this morning, and let's bring him on the air.
Yeah, this is going to be very interesting. Bret Aukamp is the Logan County Highway Superintendent. I have no idea, but I'm sure you'll tell us how many miles of highway that involves. And I also would like for you to address this business I keep hearing on Chicago radio about the big celebration for Route 66, that it's an anniversary, I suppose the 100th, right?
I believe so.
Well, they're doing stuff in Chicago about it. Yeah. So I was wondering if you could fill us in on the advent of Route 66, but evidently not, right?
I don't do a lot with Route 66.
You didn't get the memo, huh?
I did not.
And you were so young then, you've probably forgotten, right?
Well, when he was at school at the University of Illinois in Highways 101, they didn't talk about 66 at those days. So
there you go.
Anyway, Bret, we're happy to have you here. The first thing I want to ask you, if you got that road fixed north of Burton View, I used to drive a grain wagon between the farm and the elevator there, and that was a rough road. So that was in the 1930s. I hope you fixed it by now.
Well, depending on who you ask, all the roads are fixed.
There you go.
But who's right? Well, the box wagons didn't have springs on them very much.
Oh, yes.
So you bounced a lot.
That's right.
What would be your biggest challenge as you sit here with us today as man in charge of our Logan County highway system? Obviously, money is always a major challenge for any office. But is there one particular road project you'd like to see accomplished, Mr. Aukamp?
Well, I take care of all the roads across Logan County, but it's not all the roads. So I guess to preface that a little bit, I'll kind of explain a little bit more what I do for the county. So I'm in charge of the County Highway Department, so that means we take care of a lot of the rural roads out in the county, so nothing within the city limits of anywhere.
Be nice to him, folks. He can't control the weather. Yeah.
But we only take care of the main routes in between those. So like Prim Road, Nicholson Road, Atlanta Beeson Blacktop, those sort of roads. There's lots of other roads too in those very rural areas that are controlled by the townships. So they take care of the smaller roads, the more local roads out in the countryside.
How many miles of highway do you have then?
I've got 166 under my jurisdiction.
That's a bunch.
Yeah, and then I help the townships as well with all theirs. We've got 17 townships, so all together with all those rural roads, we've got 970 miles of road here in the county that we work with.
Isn't that amazing, really? The first time you hear it, it kind of takes you aback.
Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, to think that we've got, if you include all the city streets and everything, well over 1,000 miles of road here in the county, plus all the state system, too.
Well, how did they find room to grow all this corn and beans, for Pete's sake, with all those highways?
In between the lines, I guess.
I guess.
So, we've got lots of projects that we're working on. One of the ones that I inherited when I started working for the county and still trying to push forward is the 5th Street Road project. So, we take care of the western part of 5th Street Road, pretty much everything west of the city of Lincoln limits, and we're making strides on that. Working with utilities right now, and then hopefully later this year have the western 6 miles under construction. So we're actually going to break some ground on that. So that
people's eyes will open up on that because all we heard is a lot of talk about 5th Street Road and how it needs to be redone, and in fact it does. But when's that going to happen?
Yeah.
So there's something specific, more definitive for us.
Right. Yeah. It's. I mean, any large projects like that, they take a long time. There's a lot of I's to dot and T's to cross, a lot of money to be, trying to allocate it towards these large projects. So trying to get anything finally moving forward takes a lot of orchestration to make that happen. So there's been a lot of behind the scenes work to try to get it to this point, and still some utilities that need to get moved and out of the way, but we're getting very close. So.
Now, how about the people who live on that road? Do you sometimes have negotiations with the residents who live along any highway because you have to move it a little bit left or right?
Oh, sure. Yeah, and for that road, because we were trying to widen that out, it was decided early on, before I inherited the project from my predecessors, that they were going to actually kind of wiggle the road around the houses, and that way they would not take people's front yards.
Yeah.
So that worked out much better, because any of the residents on there, the last thing they want is a big, a busy road closer to their front door. So we were able to kind of wiggle that in between the houses a little bit, so it won't be a perfectly straight road. There will be a few bends in it, but that way the people that live out there can still have their have their front yards and won't have to have that given up.
They don't mind living by the highway, but they don't want the railroad to run through the middle of the house either.
Right. Yeah. So.
Well, you can't blame them.
Right.
I mean, there they are in their home and enjoying their home, and then you come along and say, hey, we're going to move this house 10 foot back. I'm sure they want to take their rifle out.
Yeah, well, so I worked with all those landowners back in 2012-ish to acquire all that right-of-way along there. So, yeah, we acquired, I believe, 22 acres of right-of-way all along that corridor to be able to make that a much wider roadway. Obviously, all that is rural farmland.
Sure.
So we worked with all those landowners to be able to make that happen, and the homeowners as well. So
I can't imagine the magnitude of the job when you're going to do something like this project.
Yeah, and that's just one of the projects that we've got going on, and like I said, these projects are very large. There's a lot of moving parts to try to get these moving forward. So it takes a long time to get them to finally move towards construction.
Well, how many years, I'm sure, have you been working on this very Fifth Street project?
That project was started by one of my predecessors, Ron Fox.
Yes.
Back in the mid-90s, I'll say. About 1995 is when that started. So it's taken a lot longer than what I would have liked.
Yeah.
But, we'll...
Things have a way of doing that.
Oh, boy, yeah.
Yes. Plans are what we make while we're waiting for life to happen.
Yes.
The right-of-way, it's inevitable. A lot of these folks live along there, or all those folks who have a culvert to go across the ditches, and every road has to have a ditch on either side for drainage. So people are going to get new entries to their property.
Right. Yeah. So we're rebuilding the driveways, putting in new culverts, so that they can have a better entrance up to the roadway. So anytime we do that, if we're rebuilding a roadway, then we'll redo all the entrances along there. If we're just resurfacing it, then we'll just kind of bring out the resurfacing over their entrances and try and give them a good approach up to the new roadways. So.
I can see in your eyes the dollar signs going like on a cash register. What is the budget for this project?
Oh gosh, I haven't looked at that for a while. Last time I looked, I think it was about $4.5. Well, probably with the price increases we've seen this past year, it'd be closer to $5 million for construction costs, and then the utility costs for just moving the utilities is probably going to be well over $1 million.
Well, can't we just write Joe? He's giving money away to everybody.
We can write whoever we want.
Besides Fifth Street, which is a major project for our Department of Highways here in the county, your budget, we have a lot of miles from Burtonview to New Holland, but seriously, there's a ongoing maintenance schedule that you have to worry with, and then there's the matter of this: we are in the snow belt. You don't think we have that much snow from year to year anymore, but when we do, that's a major job. Now, you're watching in close connection with our wonderful weather services out there so that they advise you of anything before we get to even know. Am I correct in that? So that you can kind of plan an attack on this snow removal service?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, every winter it's this job is definitely weather related. So, mild winters, I love those because that way we can kind of continue to keep on doing what I call productive work, things that's going to last. But I've got to try and watch that forecast, every couple of days or every hour sometimes, trying to figure out how much snow we're going to get, when we're going to get it, when we need to mobilize those snow plows and how to best attack that. And then trying to balance that out with the budgetary constraints too. We can't have, I've got a limited crew with some pretty old equipment, so I can't have that out there all the time. So I've got to try and decide what the best way is to try and get those roads cleared with doing that as efficiently and cost effectively as possible.
My word, man, how do you keep all the balls in the air?
I've got a lot of really good crew.
Holy cow.
Well,
got good help.
Yeah. And those are the people that we don't give credit enough to. They have to crawl out of bed at 3 in the morning because we got this snow advancing and get out there and start up their plows and so forth. And so we need to kind of touch our hat in their direction and say thank you.
Amen.
Speaking of thank yous, we have sponsors which make these programs possible. So as we say thank you to them, we'll turn Mr. Ash to the control board. Right back in the studios of WLCN, high on the road of County Road 2250, also known as Lazy Row. Our guest this morning is an old friend of my family for a long time, and I've known, I think I knew this kid when he was in swaddling clothes. And here he is, the county engineer. Bret Aukamp has been kind enough to give his time this morning. Come in and talk to us about our Logan County highways and the considerable work that goes along with maintaining those. They just don't happen, folks, so it takes a lot of work. So, Judith K., do you have any questions for Mr. Aukamp as we come back on air live?
Yeah, we're fast approaching, actually, the 20th of the month, and that's when the weight limits and fines check in.
Sure.
Who arbitrarily picked the 20th, or is that just a rule for every year of the world?
So let's see, by state statute, any of the local counties can have seasonal weight limits for up to 90 days through the year. So every county is just a little bit different. In Logan County, we decided that, I believe, back in 1959, I believe. And it was decided at that time that it was January 20th to April 18th is when we could implement those seasonal weight limits. The whole reason we do that is because each spring the soils go through a lot of freezing and thawing and freezing and thawing. And if we put a lot of weight on those roads when they're freezing and thawing, it can really do a lot of damage.
Yeah.
So we try and limit that as best we can with those seasonal weight limits. So that's why we've got signs up on most of those rural roads that have the different tonnage on there for what type of vehicle you might be driving. So during that time frame, you would need hopefully you can stay under those weight limits, and if you're in a personal car, that's not a problem, but if you're driving any sort of big truck, then you need to pay attention to those. If you need to drive during that time frame, you'll need to get a permit from our office, and then we monitor those road conditions throughout that season, and then I post that to a website calendar that we have on our website to let everybody know whether those permits are going to be valid or not valid, so whether they can haul during that time or not. So if the roads are all frozen and everything's hard and can support the weight, we'll definitely let everybody haul.
Well, let's back up just a tad. The permit is going to be valid or invalid? Mm-hmm. Well, it's kind of dicey.
Yep. So whenever we issue those permits, we explain to them, and it's got a section right there on that permit that says, please check the website to find out whether this permit is valid. And the police officers know the same thing. So if they see trucks running, then they can check the website and find out if they are allowed to be driving up and down the roads or not. And if it's one of those days where I say that hauling is not allowed, then the police officers know that they can go ahead and pull over those trucks. And even if they have a permit, that permit's not valid on those days.
But now, how do you know how much something weighs? Like I drive one of those pregnant roller skate type cars that everybody has anymore. And it weighs 42 pounds, I think. Yeah. But when you get into these people moving their farm equipment, that's a little different story.
Right. So anybody that's driving any of those larger trucks, and I mean, our weight limits don't kick in until it's 14,000 pounds. So anybody driving anything that's 14,000 pounds or larger should have a pretty good idea for how heavy their vehicles are. You know, with your pregnant roller skate, you know, that's probably going to be, you know, maybe, I don't know what it is, but
82 pounds,
maybe,
I think.
44,000 pounds, maybe something in that range. You know, a heavy pickup truck might be 6,000, 7,000 pounds. So it's really going to be more of those commercial vehicles is what those seasonal weight limits are going to be all about.
We jump in our little cars, or Judy says, her pregnant roller skate, and get on the highway and don't think a thing about it. We just take for granted and accept that we're going to have drivable roads. That doesn't happen without a lot of planning and a lot of work. How many folks do you have under your office, sir?
So there at the Highway Department, we've got 6 guys on our maintenance crew. And then I've also got 3 folks there, in addition to me, in the office staff. So out on the roads, taking care of the roads every day, we've got 6 guys that take care of those 166 miles.
No, this is a big county.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, we talked about that.
That's not very many people.
No, it's not, especially when it's time to plow snow.
Yeah.
Yeah, so each one of the guys that I have has a snowplow truck, and we be plowing snow. Each one of those routes is about 30 miles long. So trying to get that all plowed in a big storm is a big task. I remember several years ago where we had an ice storm, and the guys who were having such trouble with their trucks, they actually had to drive in reverse over their entire routes, trying to spread the salt and cinders just enough to get traction in their trucks. So it can be a real dicey event trying and get these roads opened up to try and get them safe to travel for the general public.
So some morning, if you get up and can't get on your road, you want to call Bret Aukamp. We won't put the phone number out. Let's let him look it up. But seriously, there's a lot. You have a planning schedule, and that can go awry on any 24 hours. The arrival of serious weather. You mentioned earlier a website. So Joe or Josephine Smith can get on their computer. What would be the website that they would go to?
www.logancountyil.gov, which is the general county website.
LoganCounty.il.gov.
Right, logancountyil.gov. And from there we have a page on there for the Highway Department, as do all the different county departments. But if you find our Highway Department page, then I've got lots of information for what all that we do, including the highway calendar there that I mentioned for the seasonal weight limits. There's all kinds of other information for doing business with us, our very permits and policies and things like that we deal with there at the Highway Department.
What happens to a person like me who lives out in the county and is computer illiterate? How do they function? How do they find out whether they can be and do?
We still deal with the phone. So you're always welcome to give us a call. The number there at the Highway Department, and I will share it here, is 732-3059. So they can always call the Logan County Highway Department, and we'd be happy to give them whatever information they need.
See, now you're just touching the edge of one of my pet peeves. Look it up. In what? You know, Bill and I, with this job, many times have wanted to look up a telephone number. In your what?
Yeah, a phone book? Do they still have those?
Yeah. I owe my kingdom for a phone book, you know?
I'm going to refrain from comment because that might lose my job, and I like it sitting here next to you. Bret, in your budget, and this is kind of a nebulous thing, seriously, you run a big fleet of vehicles, snowplows, trucks, etc., and there's any given day something can happen, and you have to plan for contingency plans and so forth. Well, your maintenance is an ongoing problem for you, particularly with these vehicles that move snow around.
Sure. We've got an on-staff mechanic, so we take care of everything that we can.
Well, he's a busy guy.
Oh, yeah. So try and do everything that we can in-house, but obviously we can't do a lot of this stuff in-house. A lot of this newer equipment is computerized. So if it requires computers to be able to do the diagnostics on or anything like that, a lot of times we'll have to ship that out to one of the dealerships or larger shops to be able to find out what needs to be repaired and make those changes. So, we try and do everything we can. We try and keep all of our old equipment running for as long as we can.
Sure.
But yeah, equipment's expensive. These new snowplow trucks, the way that we get them outfitted, they're running $150,000, $160,000 for that truck, for that snowplow truck. So it's pricey. And
Well, you don't just want to go out every other month and buy one, do you?
No, it takes a little bit of planning to try and come up with that kind of money.
648-5510. Our guest this morning, Mr. Bret Aukamp, Logan County boy, by the way, working for the Logan County taxpayers as director of our Logan County Highway Department. A very necessary service, day in, day out. I don't care whether the weather's nice like it is today. That can change in a short time. And the Logan County Highway Department has to adjust their schedules accordingly to make sure that we can get where we want to go. So 648-5510. If somebody has any questions and or comments, be nice to him because he might have to leave your road unplowed someday if you don't nice to him. So go ahead and call your questions in to Mr. Aukamp. He's a Logan County boy. Be proud of him. He's doing a great job for us. Go ahead, Judith K.
You said earlier, I think, that there is no charge for these permits that you can make application for.
Right.
Now, let's kind of walk us through the whole permit and fine and weight limit situation and how in the world we know what we're doing.
No problem. Okay, so on a lot of those rural roads, there are weight limit signs, and that indicates that during that time frame there at the bottom usually says January 20th to April 18th. So if you're going to be driving on that road during that time, above those posted weight limits, you will need a permit. Those permits, then, you can either get that by calling our office or by going to our website there that I mentioned, and then fill that out with the information that you have about your vehicle, about the truck that you're going to be driving, the semi-truck or truck and trailer, whatever it may be, and then bring that in or send it into my office, and then we will go ahead and record that and put my signature there at the bottom or one of my staff signatures, and then we'll send it back to that person. And they're supposed to keep that in their glove box there in their vehicle.
Okay.
Yep. And then on that permit, it says check the website before you drive during that time frame. So
and the dates of the permit are?
January 20th until April 18th of each year.
And we figure that the frost has come and gone then.
We hope.
I'd like to think so. Yeah.
All right.
We're all ready for spring by that time.
Well, where I come from, it doesn't always leave that early.
648-5510. Our guest this morning, again, is Mr. Bret Aukamp. He takes care of your county road, folks, so buy him a cup of coffee if you see him out. Be real nice to him. Pat him on the shoulders or anywhere else if you want.
Do you have a lot of dealing with the utility companies because they have to run their lines and their poles up and down your highways?
Correct. Yeah. So I deal with all the different utility companies. With Ameren or Menard Electric or Frontier. You're right. A lot of those utilities are within those public right-of-ways. Some are on private easement, but a lot of them are in the public right-of-ways. So we work together. If they need to be able to maintain their facilities, then they let me know, hopefully, and that way I know who's digging within the right-of-ways. If we need to have their utilities moved so that we can do our part there to maintain the roadways, then we kind of notify them, and that way we work together to try and occupy that same space. So
I think this is real nice to hear about government entities that can work together.
Well, we don't always work together all that well, but we all work together.
You're working on it, though.
There you go.
Yeah, there you go. Okay.
Your crew, you have a regular hourly schedule, but that can be changed in a matter of short time. Heavy snow, and you've got to get on the phone. And who's responsible for calling your men out?
So either myself or my operations manager, and usually it's a combination of both.
So if Joe or John are snug in their sack about 2 or 3 in the morning, it's not uncommon for them to get called out.
Well, I try and give them at least a few hours notice. So like for instance, we got a little bit of snow and ice here this past weekend. So I was up early on Sunday morning driving roads and trying to determine when and if we needed to mobilize snowplows to be able to take care of things. So, and this this part of the decisions is trying to balance that out. Is when do we need to mobilize those snowplows? How can I afford to be able to do that? Trying to get that limited crew out to make do the most good with the least amount of money. So we want to make sure, priority for us is always those school buses. If it's a school day and trying to get those school buses out in the morning safely and back home in the afternoons, that's our priority. So that's what we always try to do. If we can make things easier for people to get back and forth to work as well, great, but people work at all different times of the day. So we try and focus on making sure those school buses can get out in the mornings and back in the afternoons and get those kids back home.
Josephine Smith sitting out there and they're snug in her own homes with the snow piling up. They don't necessarily realize the seriousness of you getting your crews out there so that these school buses can run.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That's just one little example.
Right. And lately we haven't been getting the snow like we may have used to a few decades ago, but it's still serious stuff, and trying to make sure that we can get all those plows out there, removing the snow, trying to treat the ice as best we can. We don't have, speaking of snow removal here with the county, we're a little different than what IDOT does with their roads. With the state highways, they have what's called a clear road policy.
A what road?
A clear road policy.
Yeah.
And they put salt on every mile of those roadways and trying to make sure that they are 100% clear. We don't do that on the rural roads. We don't have the budget to be able to do that or the traffic to justify it. So what we'll do at the county is we'll put salt and cinders on those critical areas. So coming up to a stop sign or along curves or places like that, because we want to make sure that people can get stopped at those critical areas. But what we really need people to do in situations like that, and we're really blessed with the citizens here in Logan County, slow down. Drive with some common sense when it gets to be cold like that, when there might be ice and snow on the road. Slow down, be prepared, drive defensively to where we can avoid those accidents.
Common sense. That's quite a category there.
Uh-huh.
You mentioned the school buses. That would just be scary to be responsible for them going up and down your roads after the snow.
Absolutely, and God
I bet
bless
that's
all those.
a priority.
All those school bus drivers. I mean, they're out, early mornings, maybe after a snowstorm, and like I said, we're doing our best to try to get those roads cleared. But we only take care of some of the roads, so I'm sure that they are driving on roads that are pretty slick at times. So
They got a big responsibility.
They do. My hat goes off to them.
Really?
I have a technical question which will answer nothing for anybody. The salt sheds that you see up and down the highway, they're constructed in a certain configuration. Why is that, sir?
Well, when you think about salt and how you can stockpile that, it ends up in a pile. So a lot of times those salt buildings like that end up being kind of a dome shaped because it's naturally fitting over that pile. They kind of have a conveyor belt to where they drop that in the very top of the building,
top.
and then it just ends up in a pile inside. They're also kind of vented like that to where all that airflow is going to go out towards the very top, trying to keep it more ventilated and drier. Obviously, salt's pretty caustic. It tends to rust any steel material that it may be made out of. So it's difficult for those sort of buildings. We don't have that kind of building at the Highway Department. We're pretty low budget. We put our salt in the pile and put a tarp over it every year. So that seems
kind of elementary, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it's
so seriously, the responsibility of buying the right quantity, hopefully the right quantity of salt, and having it stashed away, is your responsibility to make sure that. Now, whence cometh all that salt? Commercially, where does that come from geographically?
Geographically, there's different salt mines across the country. There's some in, I believe upstate New York, and several out west in western Kansas, I believe. So most of those different salt mines are producing it year-round whenever they can. And then depending on the weather situation, there can be a really high demand for salt one year and then maybe not so much demand for salt one year. So what we do locally, we contract out for salt. We always get about the same amount each year. and that way we stockpile some, and that way we always have some left over from year to year. Sometimes our pile gets a little low and it starts making me a little nervous. Other times we've got plenty on hand, and it all depends on what Mother Nature brings us.
Well, it's a stable product. It doesn't decompose, so...
Yeah, but it can compose in that I would wonder how you keep it from turning into just one humongous block of salt.
If you keep it dry, it tends to work better, which is why we keep it covered there with the tarp.
Well, a tarp over it
but
isn't really, that's not very scientific.
Right, and it does tend to get clumps in it, but luckily we've got equipment to where we can dig into it, kind of break that up a little bit, and mix it in. We mix it in with cinders, which is the black stuff that you see out there on the road, so a byproduct of burning coal. So we spread that on the road for a little bit more traction, and also to attract a little bit more sunlight to be able to help melt those roads. So
don't you come up kind of short of cinders anymore?
We have a local source to where we can get those cinders, so we're very fortunate here. If we don't have that source, then we can always mix in sand or rock or something like that. But yeah, cinders are not nearly as common as what they may have been decades ago.
In my youth, they were common.
Oh, sure, yeah.
But they've outgrown.
648-5510. Our guest this morning, Mr. Bret Aukamp. As I say, he's a Logan County boy who done made good. Taking care of our county roads. It's a really big responsibility, and he doesn't have that big a crew. And of course, concomitant with all that worry is the fact that he has to prepare a budget every year. And do you work in conjunction with our County Board of Supervisors, sir?
Absolutely. Yep. So I work with the county board and trying to do the local budgets every year. So part of our funding stream comes from property tax. So every time that we all pay our taxes and kind of moan about it, that money, a portion of that money then goes to the highway department. Of your total tax bill, we get think about 1% of that total local tax bill going towards our local highways. So it's not much in the big scheme of things, but every little bit helps.
It's a part, yeah.
And then we also get part of the motor fuel tax money. So whenever we fill up our gas tanks, we are paying tax to the federal government or the state of Illinois, and then that gets funneled back towards us, redistributed towards each one of those highway departments. So that's another one of our funding streams that we have to be able to have some of that revenue to be able to maintain those roads.
In our few remaining minutes, can we go back to the 5th Street Road project? Because that's a project, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about what you're going to do and how you're going to do it and how in the world you're going to pay for it.
And you got 30 seconds for that.
Okay. We've been saving money for that project since it was conceived back in the mid-90s. So we've been stockpiling money away at that time and trying to save that nest egg for this construction. So we're also using some other money that we were able to acquire along the way, different grants and things like that, to be able to make that happen. So we've got some money to be able to get most of the project done. We're still working with trying to get those utilities moved. All those power poles have got to get moved over because we acquired new right-of-way to make the road wider. So we've got to move power poles back and extend pipeline casings and move phone lines. So all those things need to get done yet. So those are some of the tasks that need to get done before we can start construction.
You mentioned one word, pipeline. We never think of them because we didn't ever see them, but they're along the roadway somewhere. And so that's going to be that'll be a major project.
Yeah, luckily on this one, they just cross the roadway. So we just need to extend those casings just to protect those pipelines underneath this new right-of-way. So luckily it's not a major part of the project, but we still need to deal with that. So the portion of the road that we're going to be dealing with first, hopefully under construction here soon, would be the western 6 miles. So that would go from the New Holland Middletown Blacktop or 100 Avenue all the way to the Quarry Road, which is 700 Avenue. So between 100 Ave and 700 Ave is what we'd be getting under construction here sooner than later.
Now let's describe streets and avenues.
Sure.
Because that's what somebody way back a long time ago in their infinite wisdom decided to designate this so that we would be more specific. So east and west and north and south, which is which?
So north and south roads are the avenues. and the east and west roads are the streets. And the way that Logan County was set up back when 911 was brought in here to the county was they set up Logan County on a grid system. So all the grid, if you look at a map of Logan County, it all kind of starts down in that very southwest corner, and then that would be 0 Avenue, 0 Street. And then every mile going north, that would be 100 Street, 200 Street, 300 Street, and so on. Every mile going to the east would be 100 Avenue, 200 Avenue, 300 Avenue, and so on.
Basically, it's quite simple.
Very simple. If you look at a map, it's a very simple way of finding anywhere. The addressing that we have here in the county as well all matches in with that road numbering system, so it works out really well. I mean, I grew up, my address was Rural Route 1, Box 184. Nobody knew where that was. And then my address changed. Even though we didn't move, my address became Rural Route 1, Box 249. Again, nobody knew where those places were. Now, with the rural reference sign, there's an address that tells you exactly where that would be if anybody could just look at a map and understand how that's laid out.
But everybody doesn't have a map.
No, but if even,
that's a bummer.
True, but even if you know your directions in.
Well, now there's the biggest if we're going to ask all day. We all know people who are just simply not coordinated as far as east, west, and north, south is concerned.
Yeah. What do? Give everybody a compass?
Well, you can. I guess if you're still driving along the same road and you cross one of the roads, which we all have these nice green signs out in the county, these rural reference signs that tell you what road you're crossing. So that road's going to have a number on it. So let's say if you cross 700 Avenue and then you drive for another mile, then you're going to be crossing 800 Avenue. And another mile you're going to be crossing 900 Avenue. So that's kind of how it's laid out, because luckily in this county we're pretty square, so most of the roads run right on the grid system.
Well, and nice and flat, so you can kind of lay it out, other than that pimple down in Elkhart that sticks up from the ground.
We've got a few hills and hollers, but yeah, for the most part everything's just kind of a flat grid.
Yeah. It's a little different. But
if we just faded off the air, Mabel just walked across the console for controls. Mr. Ash has a hard time.
Run by a cat. Who determines how many people are using the highway to validate the decisions to resurface this one or move that one or whatever?
Sure. No, good question. So we work with IDOT, and every so many years they will put traffic counters out on roadways. So they will create maps that have average daily traffic numbers on every one of the roadways. So some roads there may only be 25 cars a day. Other roads there may be well over 1,000. On the interstate, I think we're about 10,000 cars a day. So all those different factors. Then you can look at, well, how many people are using that road, and then what obviously the wider the road is, or the more traffic on it, the wider it needs to be, and certain standards like that.
I assume that project isn't accomplished by people standing on the roadside with a great big clipboard and making hash marks.
Are you looking for a job?
Yeah, I need meaningful work.
So no, there's mechanized ways and computerized ways to do that, to be able to find that information. So they do that every once in a while. They'll put sensors down on the roadways to be able to help track that traffic, and then they'll compile all that data and make that available. And you can find that on the IDOT website to be able to find out what those numbers are, what those traffic numbers are on any given road. And that really helps us out for doing the planning purposes for roadways and roadway improvements. Not just where the traffic is, but does the existing road satisfy the traffic that's there, or does it really need to be improved? So that's some of the tools that we use when trying to plan for how to spend that limited money that we have. So trying to improve roads and trying to decide how much improvement needs to be made.
Boy, you must play the balancing game all day.
I keep a lot of plates
spinning.
spinning.
All night. Goodness.
Brett, the farmer, which is our road, probably our biggest customers on our county roads, they have to plan too. For instance, some of them have a regular system for when they market their grain, and that goes into weights on the roads and so forth. So Mr. and Mrs. Farmer out there on the road, they're one of your biggest customers, and they're the ones that put all the weight on the road.
Sure. Yeah, and that's one of the factors that we take into account too, is where that, not just where the traffic is coming from, but where the heavy traffic is coming from. You know, some of the roads have really evolved over the years to where, you know, especially with farming, since you brought that up, farming used to be that, you know, it might be a couple grain wagons that you were hauling to the local elevator, or you were taking it back to the bin site, and everybody kind of worked within that geographic location and wherever they were. They might have a field a few miles away, but that's about it. And now a lot of the farms have gotten much, much larger. They're farming over tens, 100 miles or more to be able, and then all that material, all that grain that's coming out of the fields then is getting loaded in semis and traveled for a long ways. So those vehicle miles traveled with semis is much higher than it used to be. And then all that grain that is getting taken into elevators, let's say it's getting taken to the river or taken down to the major processors in Decatur, you know, all that material, all that grain gets hauled on those local roads, at least for a while. Some of those local roads really see some weight, and if they're not built for it, they really show some damage. Yeah. So that's what we try and keep ahead of, trying to plan for that, trying to repair the damage when it happens, trying to make those improvements whenever we can afford it, to be able to beef those roads up and make sure they can handle it.
Yes, this morning, taking care of our Logan County highways. We appreciate very much your taking time out of a very busy schedule, Bret, and they've passed up an opportunity to tell you what a great job you're doing, so I will thank you on behalf of our county citizens. Thank you very much, Bret Aukamp.
Well, thank you.